Even by Astartes standards, the Space Wolves stand as a singular breed. In battle, they unleash a ferocity bordering on savagery. This Sixth Legion hunts like a pack, relentless and suicidal in their onslaughts, tearing foes apart until nothing remains of the target. They are akin to ravenous yet loyal wolves fostered by the Emperor. No order, no matter how grim, would be questioned by these wolf-like warriors. In truth, long before their Primarch's return, the early Space Wolves were part of the Triad Legions, alongside the Salamanders and Alpha Legion, a deliberate grouping, not a random alliance. As detailed in Horus Heresy Book 1, Betrayal, these three legions were the Emperor's tier. One response forces during the Great Crusade, each engineered for a distinct black role. The Space Wolves, codenamed Void Hunters, had gene seed modified to detect and neutralize other Astartes. The Canis Helix, a genetic marker unique to the wolves, let them track Astartes' gene signatures across star systems, and their Fenris-forged frostblades could pierce power armor's molecular bonds, an advantage no other legion possessed. This was why the Emperor named them his executioners. They were built to kill their own kind if duty demanded it. The Salamanders, Forge Wardens, had gene seed enhancing thermal resistance and technical aptitude, making them experts at destroying Xenos forges or corrupted Imperial armories. The Alpha Legion, Shadows, had gene seed that suppressed their warp signature, specializing in infiltration and sabotage. The Emperor never publicly acknowledged the Triad's existence. Their missions were classified even from other Primarchs, a secrecy that fueled rivalry between the Space Wolves and Alpha Legion, one that would fester into open enmity during the heresy. When their Primarch, Layman Russ, returned to the Legion, he brought with him the tribal customs of Fenris, his death-world home, blood oaths, wolfskin cloaks, and a reverence for strength that clashed with the Imperium's rigid hierarchy. This further isolated the Space Wolves from other Imperial forces. To most outsiders, the Sixth Legion's warriors seemed little more than unrefined barbarians, crude, unruly, and alien. If Fenris's ice and fire forged their souls, Russ's gene seed shaped their bodies. Under their Primarch's leadership, the Wolves embraced their role in the Imperium. They executed the Emperor's will without complaint, even if it meant slaying their fellow Astartes. Thus, their title, the Emperor's Executioners, was earned, not given. Now, manipulated by chaos and the traitor Horus Betrayal, the Sixth Legion loomed over Prospero, the homeworld of the Thousand Suns, the 15th Legion. Layman Russ, the Wolf King, had issued an ultimatum to his brother Magnus the Red: disarm the Legion, evacuate the civilians, and submit to Imperial judgment. But the Chaos Gods twisted the warp, ensuring none of these messages reached Magnus. When Prospero's ruler remained silent, Russ hardened his resolve, though doubt gnawed at him. He had received two conflicting orders, one from the Emperor, commanding him to arrest Magnus and bring him to Terra for trial, and another, forged by Horus, demanding he destroy the Thousand Suns, heretics corrupted by sorcery. As recounted in Prospero Burns by Dan Abnett, Horus's lieutenants, like Erebus of the Word-Bearers, convinced Russ the Second Order was genuine. He would fulfill the mandate handed down by the Emperor and Warmaster. The pack tensed, growling low, as a cataclysmic battle between two Astartes legions drew near. On Prospero, unaware of Russ's attempts to parley, Magnus the Red waited in dread for the Emperor's punishment. He knew well the crimes he had committed, violating the edicts of Nicaea, which banned unrestricted psyche use, and using sorcery to breach the Imperial webway, sabotaging the Emperor's secret project to free humanity from reliance on the warp. Tormented by guilt, Magnus locked himself in his libraries, frantically searching for any way to atone. It was then that chaos whispered in his ear, preying on his turmoil. Yet Magnus clung to his last shreds of loyalty. He had ordered the Thousand Suns fleet, once stationed above Prospero, split into 4 battle groups and dispatched to distant corners of the galaxy, deliberately separating them from the incoming Imperial forces. He even hoped his sons would not resist the Space Wolves, that they would accept whatever penance the Emperor deemed fit. But faced with the extinction of their legion, the Thousand Suns refused. Led by their chief librarian, Archman, they rejected their Primarch's orders. Without Magnus's leadership or fleet support, the Astartes resolved to fight to the death, defending their home from the invading pack. And so, in the 734th year of the 31st millennium, the Battle of Prospero began. Deprived of their fleet, the Thousand Sons quickly lost orbital control. For the Wolves, orbital supremacy was a boon, but the enemy on the ground remained a full Astartes legion. Leman Russ first ordered a saturation bombardment of Prospero from the forbidden orbital zones. In an instant, a hail of artillery fell from the sky. The planet's geography was shattered. Mountains were flattened, oceans vaporized, cities reduced to rubble. Prospero's air thickened with searing heat and ash. Once a paradise of libraries and spires, now a scorched wasteland. Only one city survived, Tisca, the Bright City, the capital of Prospero. Most of the remaining Thousand Sons had rallied there, shielded by a massive psychic barrier raised by the combined might of the Order of the Raptor, one of the Legion's 5 specialized Psyker cabals called Orders. As detailed in A Thousand Sons by Graham McNeil, the Thousand Sons Psyker structure was a well-oiled machine, each order with a unique role. Order of the Raptor, the Defenders, 300 of their Psykers linked minds in a psychic conclave, channeling power from Prospero's core, a warp-touched crystal called the Heart of Prospero. The shield bent incoming boats mid-flight and incinerated drop pods before impact. It only faltered when the silent Sisterhood's null fields disrupted the conclave's link. Order of the Scarab, the Assaulters, led by Archiman, they wielded offensive powers, warp lightning, pyrokinesis to turn streets into death traps. Order of the Eye, the Seers, provided precognitive warnings, though chaos clouded their visions. Order of the Cobra, the Healers, stabilized wounded Astartes, but their numbers were too few to counter attrition. Order of the Phoenix, the Elites, Magnus's personal guard, wielding relics like the Staff of Magnus, a Psyker focus amplifying powers tenfold. Behind the Raptor's shield, the 15th Legion gathered all their remaining strength, vowing to hold off the Wolves. When the shield finally fell, the Raptor Psykers did not flee. They sacrificed themselves to detonate the heart of Prospero, creating a firestorm that delayed the Wolves for 3 hours, buying time for survivors to reach Tisca's final stronghold, the Pyramid of Photep. After the orbital barrage, Leman Russ decided to lead the ground assault on Tisca personally, to deliver judgment to the Thousand Sons and to his brother Magnus. A vast landing force assembled, Space Wolves, Astartes militia, and the Adeptus Custodes, supported by the Silent Sisterhood. Landing craft swarmed around the city like sand in a storm. Leman Russ was the first to set foot on Prospero's soil. He led the pack in sweeping the defenses along the city's eastern coast, carving a vital beachhead for incoming troops. Heavy armor was airdropped into the fray. True to the Wolves' brutal style, these war machines razed every structure in their path, advancing methodically behind infantry to reduce buildings and fortifications to rubble. In a mission where another Astartes legion was the enemy, civilian casualties ceased to matter. Missiles, melta-weapons, and plasma turned Tisca into an inferno. The Wolves roared their war cries, their weapons spewing death bolts, chain axes, and frost blades, tearing through anything that stood in their way. Yet behind the choking smoke, the Thousand Sons fought back with fierce resolve. Beyond the surviving Astartes of the 15th Legion, they were joined by the Crimson Guard elite mortal auxiliaries of Prospero, the Spire Defenders. Disciplined and trained, these mortals did not flee from the terror of the Space Wolves. They took up arms, dug in, and faced an Astartes legion's wrath head-on. With unyielding will and concentrated fire, they fulfilled their oaths as Prospero's defenders. At one point, even halting the Wolves' advance, cold, pinning the ferocious pack to their positions. Behind the Spire Defenders stood the Thousand Sons, their psychic powers unleashed. Archiman led the Order of the Scarab into the fray, and for a moment the Thousand Sons hesitated. These were once their brothers, Astartes, bound by the Emperor's vision. But that hesitation vanished the moment the Wolves struck without mercy. There was no right or wrong now, only war. Bolts clashed, chainsaws screamed, and any bond between the Thousand Sons and Space Wolves was shattered forever. The Thousand Sons were vastly outnumbered, but their psychic might let them stand against 10 foes at once. Their psykers unleashed wave after wave of warp-spawned attacks. Wolves were hurled through the air, their bodies twisted and torn apart by telekinetic force. Others were incinerated by psychic fire and lightning, reduced to unrecognizable cinders. The 6th Legion's assault teams fell in droves. The Thousand Sons even deployed their last remaining armor, augmented by psychic energy. Every street and corner of Tiska became a hellish battlefield. For a time, the defenders held back the first wave. Flesh burned under phospholites, armor was breached by bolts, and the attackers paid a brutal price for every step forward. Then, the Emperor's hand struck. The Adeptus Custodes and the Silent Sisterhood joined the fray, reinforcing the wolves. The Silent Sisterhood specialists in countering psykers were all pariahs, rare human mutants completely severed from the warp. Most sentient beings have a connection to the warp, often called a soul. Psykers' connections are so strong, their souls shine like stars in the warp. Pariahs, however, have no warp presence at all. Their aura is like a black hole. As detailed in Prospero Burns, the sisters deployed in a V formation, their null auras merging into a single wave that swept the battlefield. This did not just weaken psykers, it painfully severed their warp link. Thousand Sons psykers described it as having their soul torn out piece by piece. Some went catatonic, others died from the shock. The Custodes fought alongside the sisters, using their guardian spears, which disrupt warp energy, to finish off weakened psykers. Custodian Tribune Constantin Valdor, for example, killed 12 scarab psykers in 1 minute, his spear's energy blade cutting through their psychic shields like paper. The sisters focused on high-value targets like Archiman. He only survived because a Spire defender threw himself in front of a sister's bolt, giving Archiman time to teleport away. With the Silent Sisters crippling their psykers and the Custodes adding their might, the 15th Legion could not hold. The Thousand Sons began to retreat, but even then they had delayed the invaders for days. By this point, the 15th Legion was decimated. Barely 1,000 warriors remained. When the Space Wolves' 13th Great Company, the Wolf Guard, led the charge toward the Pyramid of Photep, Magnus the Red finally answered his son's pleas. He would save his legion. Since the Wolves' arrival, Magnus had remained sequestered, watching his sons die and his home burn. He knew the truth. Both sides on Prospero were already pawns of chaos, manipulated like puppets. The ruinous powers craved their bloodshed, and their whispers had hounded him. Magnus had once hoped to atone for his sins, to accept punishment, but now he chose to save his sons. He accepted a bargain with Tzeentch, the chaos god of fate and sorcery. As outlined in Horusheresy, Book 3, Extermination, Tzeentch promised to teleport the surviving 1,000 sons to the planet of the sorcerers, a daemon world in the Eye of Terror, in exchange for 2 oaths. First, Magnus would become Tzeentch's oracle, using his precognition to serve the god of change. Second, the 1,000 sons would abandon all loyalty to the Emperor and embrace chaos. In a blaze of light and fire, the Primarch descended onto the battlefield. His psychic power was overwhelming. When he turned his single eye on the wolves, even the bravest among them went mad and died on the spot. Only one figure stood firm, locking eyes with Magnus, the Primarch of the 6th Legion, Lehman Russ. Magnus ordered his remaining sons to retreat into the Pyramid of Photep. He would hold the line alone. The Crimson King used his psychic sorcery to halt the wolves' advance, then turned to face his brother. The 2 giants, Primarchs, Legion Masters, charged each other, and a cataclysmic duel began. Russ wielded his sword. Mjolnir and axe, Fenrisian axe, Magnus unleashed torrents of psychic power, tearing chunks of the city from the ground to hurl at his brother. As the Primarchs clashed, wave after wave of wolves tried to storm the pyramid. The 1,000 sons prepared for their final stand, until a deafening cry of agony from Magnus shattered the air. When the Sorcerer King had struck Russ down with a devastating psychic blow, the Wolf King had retaliated, slashing out with Mjolnir and cutting through Magnus's remaining eye. The 15th Legion's Primarch reeled, channeling his psychic power to heal the wound, only for the downed Russ to surge to his feet, ignoring his own injuries. He tackled the injured giant, using his brute strength to pin Magnus down, lift him overhead, and bring him crashing down, his knee shattering Magnus's spine. The sound of their Primarch's agony tore through every surviving Thousand Son. They knew their father was defeated. Magnus had foreseen this, his death in this duel, the Thousand Sons' end in Prospero's flames. But he had made his pact with Tzeentch. As Russ raised his axe to deliver the killing blow to his paralyzed brother, the Crimson King unleashed one last reality-warping spell, sacrificing his physical form and shattering his soul into 1,000 shards, one for each surviving son. He tore open a massive warp rift to teleport them to the planet of the sorcerers. Magnus's soul fragments each carried a piece of his power, but also Tzeentch's curse. The Thousand Sons would slowly fade into the warp unless they used sorcery to anchor themselves, a fate that would later drive Archaman to cast the rubric of Archaman, turning non-Psyker sons into dust trapped in power armor. As his body dissolved, the former Lord of Prospero spoke his final words to Russ. The 6th Legion claims another victory. Not a taunt, but a warning. Russ had just become Horus's pawn. Prospero, once a paradise, was now a ruin, laid to waste by Fenris's wolves. It was exactly what Horus had wanted. No need for him to lift a finger. The Imperium had destroyed one of the legions he feared most. In the aftermath, Russ found a fragment of Magnus's journal in the Pyramid of Photep, revealing Magnus had tried to warn the Emperor about Horus's treachery. Guilt haunted Russ for the rest of his life. After the heresy, he disappeared into the warp while searching for Magnus, leaving the Space Wolves with a single command: never trust the War Master's words again. With Prospero in ashes, the Horus heresy erupted. The Imperium, deprived of the Thousand Sons' psychic expertise, would struggle to counter Chaos's warp-spawned horrors. But before Horus could launch his full rebellion against the Imperium, he had already sown seeds of treachery. He had spoken to his closest Primarch brothers, corrupting them with honeyed words and Chaos's whispers. Angron of the 12th Legion, World Eaters, Mortarion of the 14th Death Guard, and his dearest friend, Fulgrim of the 3rd Emperor's Children, all pledged their legions to the War Master's cause. Fulgrim, corrupted by a daemon sword, had even murdered his own son, Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, to seal his loyalty to Chaos. Using his authority as War Master, Horus had also dispatched the Imperium's most loyal Primarchs, those least susceptible to corruption, to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, far from Terra and his own forces. Lion L. Johnson of the 1st Legion, Dark Angels, Sanguinius of the 9th Blood Angels, and Robut Gilliman of the 13th Ultramarines were all sent to fight in distant sectors. Other legions, the Alpha Legion, Salamanders, Iron Hands, Night Lords, and White Scars, were scattered across the galaxy on unrelated campaigns. Only the Imperial Fists, under Rogel Dawn, were recalled by the Emperor to defend Terra itself, reinforcing the Sol system. But before Horus could turn his full might on the Imperium, he had one more task: eliminating the uncontrollable elements within his own traitor, legions, the Loyalists who still clung to their oaths to the Emperor. To this end, Horus and his 3 traitor Primarchs, Angron, Mortarion, Fulgrim, gathered their forces at the Istvan system, far from Terra. Their target, Istvan III, a world where they would purge the Loyalists from their ranks. As recounted in Galaxy in Flames by Ben Counter, the purge was a masterpiece of deception. The lie Horus told the Loyalist companies of the World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's Children that Istvan III was a rebellious world, needing liberation. He ordered them to land first, promising orbital support. The bombardment. Once the Loyalists were spread thin on the ground, Horus gave the order for exterminatus, orbital bombardment to destroy all life. The traitor fleets opened fire, killing 90% of the Loyalists in the first hour. The ground purge, For the survivors, Horus sent in his traitor Astartes. Angron led World Eater's berserkers in a bloodbath, hacking down loyalists who refused to join the heresy. He killed Captain Kern's loyalist brother, pushing Kern to the edge of madness, foreshadowing his fall to Khorne. Mortarion personally executed the Death Guard's Primus Medicae, who had refused to poison loyalist supplies. His legion used chemical weapons to gas holdouts. Fulgrim's Emperor's children used sonic blasters to shatter loyalists' bones and eardrums before finishing them off. A handful of loyalists escaped, like Captain Garviel Loken of the Lunar Wolves, but Horus declared them traitors in imperial propaganda. These survivors formed loyalist heresy cells, spreading word of Horus's betrayal across the galaxy. For Horus's rise to power, a terrible betrayal had been completed. The Istvan III Purge proved his traitor legions were willing to kill their own brothers, and it cleared the way for the next, deadlier phase of the heresy, the March on Terror.